I filmed this once before, and I made a joke about how since quarantine was still going on, I couldn't get a haircut. But that doesn't really apply anymore because, oh well, I just need to get better at handling my life. Hello, my name is Luis. I am a classically trained composer, and I decided to devote this time to help out some composers and producers, no matter what genre you're really from. Just here, lending a helping hand. Well, I have my notes here, so I'm sorry if I look down, but that's how I be. I noticed that I was talking to a lot of especially beginner composers. I noticed a lot of people have a trouble sort of either starting at all with a new piece of music or a new project, or just knowing what comes first. So a question I get asked constantly is, what should I do first, right? The chords or the melody? And if you're like me, you're probably gonna pull it all out of your butt at once. But there's sort of a right answer to this, and what I would suggest is to start with the melodic content, which is what this video is going to be about. So just basically how to improve your melodies and how to improve your melodies, how to make them sound sensical in a way. So basically, here are some tips that I think are really going to help everyone out there. And if you have a project and you already have the chords down and you're really just trying to nail a good melody for it, I can also give you guys some tips. It's no problem at all. So let's see what comes next. I will be saying some more advanced things specifically for classical composers. I say classical in quotations because we all know classical is a period of time in history, but you know what I mean, like art music or new music. I'm gonna throw out some more advanced sort of tips that you can completely ignore if they do not apply to you, or maybe you can find some way to incorporate them into your more contemporary business. So here are 4 tips that will most definitely help you write better melodies, and I say most definitely because they are systematic, hence they will always work. So thank you for your attention. I will no longer waste your time. Let's get right into it. Know how long your melody is. The reason for this is that in a lot of cases there are exceptions to this. Some of the more pleasant melodies to the ear are those who are built on a bar number that is a multiple of 4, so 4, 8, 16, 32. So that could be really helpful. That does not always have to be the case. In contemporary music, pop music, sometimes there are 7-bar phrases. Even in classical music, Haydn was very much known for his humor by phrasing awkwardly and stuff like that. So this is not like set in stone, but what is very important that you know is how long you want your theme to be, how long you want your melody to be. That's a number you have to have in your head. You cannot just let it happen, because you're losing control over your song, over your piece. And this is something that a lot of beginners, it's a mistake a lot of beginners make. They just, since they have no system, they have no way of knowing what is objectively good according to their own standards. They're leaving it up to fate to decide if the song they're writing is going to be good or not. They don't have control over their craft. So having a well-established system will most definitely help you with that. And you can start very basic. There is a very high level of complexity in music today. There are very complex systems, but there are also very basic ones that you can just introduce into your music writing skill set immediately, and you will notice the difference. So tip number 2. I recommend, as I said before, there are many different types of ways to structure a melody, but here are 2 ideas that I want you guys to understand. These are from the classical era. Now, this does not mean that your song is going to sound classical. It's not going to be boring if classical music bores you. So it simply means that it's very, very nicely, precisely structured. Something that makes melodies catchy is that our brains are able to interpret them extraordinarily quickly. if you have a well-structured theme melody, the brains of the listeners are really gonna break it down immediately, and it's gonna memorize them. And this is extremely important because this creates a catchy melody. So a well-structured melody will most definitely be a catchy one. We're gonna go into two basic ideas of form. One of them is gonna be the sentence, and we're gonna use those sentences, which are types of phrases, and we're gonna put two of them together to create a period. So let's get right into that. First, I just threw a word at you, and I didn't really define it. So what is form? Think of language. We have a very specific order in which we speak to communicate coherent ideas. This is what we know as grammar. I have no idea. We have the same idea in music. It is, form is basically what gives your melodies that coherentness, that sensicalness, and that ability to be interpreted quickly by your listener. So first, let's get right into the sentence. What makes a sentence? A sentence can be divided into two different halves. We have the presentation and the continuation. Think of this sort of as a subject and a predicate in language. So now let's see what makes those two sections distinct. In the presentation of our sentence, we will have a basic idea, and then that basic idea repeated, sometimes with a slight variation, and then that's gonna drill that melodic idea into your listener's brain. And then in the continuation is simply to move to a state of punctuation. Punctuation, just like in language, means a stop or an end to an idea. This could be done through tonal cadences, for example, but in an atonal world that the new music lives in, it does not necessarily have to be. It can just be a breath, a pause, or some other way to create a punctuation. But for my songwriters out there, I'm going to talk about some tonal cadences that you can use in your music. As I said, a cadence is a tonal punctuation. It is made up of two chords, and it really brings your theme to a stop. When we're talking about cadences, we're gonna talk about harmony, but right now we're talking about melody, so we're gonna sort of intertwine them in a second. There are 5 types of different cadences that we're gonna discuss today. There are many more that you can come up with, but these are just the ones that are the most commonly known, especially in common practice tonality. Common practice being what Mozart and Beethoven invented. Anyway, and Haydn. The perfect authentic cadence is composed of, in the scale of C major, a G major chord resolved to a tonic chord, tonic meaning the first chord in the scale, which is C major. So we have our 5-1, our famous 5-1, the fifth chord of the scale resolved into the first chord of the scale in root position, where T in the soprano or the top voice resolves to Do, or Re in the top voice resolves down to Do. They both have to be in root position, meaning that the root of the chord, the most stable position of the chord, has to be represented in the cadence. Our imperfect authentic cadence is the exact same thing, but without all the rules. It can be that the chords are not in root position, or that T or Re in the soprano or in the top voice do not resolve to Do. We have a half cadence. This is very important. We're gonna get back to this one because it's a very important one. It is a cadence where we just land on the fifth chord, and that's where the phrase ends. We just end on the fifth chord. Notice I said that tonal cadences relied on 2 chords, yet I'm saying that this one only requires 1. Well, it technically requires 2 chords as well, because you always need to set up the dominant chord in tonal harmony. This can be done through a predominant chord, meaning a chord before the dominant, dominant meaning the fifth chord of the scale. So you still need to set that up. And finally, you have the plagal cadence, meaning this is just, as I defined before, 2 chords. In this case, is the fourth chord of the scale resolving back to the first chord of the scale. Man, it can be in any way it wants. Now, notice I defined cadences in a harmonic way, but we're talking about strict melodies right now, nothing else, just melodies, a single line of melody. So how do we bring the idea of cadences, which is a harmonic idea, onto the realm of melodies? Well, we can simply imply it by using the key pitches of those chords in the melody. Notice I said that in a perfect authentic cadence, re or ti have to resolve to do and the soprano in the last 2 chords. So we can represent this by making our 2 last pitches in our theme be re or ti to do, because our melody is most likely going to be our soprano. In more advanced orchestration, that's not always the case, but in most types of songs, contemporaries, or just in general, a lot of the time it is the case, so we can just assume so. Now, what do we do with sentences? Well, let's get into periods. Period is a conjunction of 2 or more phrases. In order to have, we're going to be talking about periods formed by 2 phrases or sentences. And just to keep it simple, you have to follow a very specific rule to have a period, however, and that is to, between the 2 phrases, you have to have a weak cadence or punctuation, and then at the end, you have to have a stronger one. So we talked about the cadences just a second ago, and all these cadences have several different arrays of strengths. The strongest one, of course, being the perfect authentic cadence. And by strengths, I mean a pull, a tonal pull back to the tonic. One of our weakest ones is actually the half cadence, because it's the only one that we discussed that does not resolve to the tonic, or our first chord. So it could be a very good choice, as I hinted earlier, to form a period. But there are many different types of combinations you can really put together. You can put together a combination of an imperfect authentic cadence followed by a perfect authentic cadence. You can have a half cadence followed by an imperfect authentic cadence. I recommend, to make it as clear as possible, that you resort to half cadence to perfect authentic cadence. That way there's no mistake whatsoever, no room left for ambiguity. There are 2 types of periods I would like to talk about. We have a parallel period and a contrasting period. A parallel period is simply a period in which the 2 phrases start similar or identically. And unfortunately, with these definitions, we sometimes do fall into ambiguity, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to tell. A contrasting period, it's the opposite. So sometimes there are some discussions, especially when doing a musical analysis, which if you're going to music school, you're going to have to do. And sometimes there is room for ambiguity between periods, like whether they are contrasting or parallel, or it gets hard, but if you're the composer, you have almost complete control over what you want to do. we're going to get into our third tip, and this is more of a suggestion that I encourage everyone to try. That is interval ethos. The idea of interval ethos is to simply play around with different intervals, whether it's a minor second, major third, and sort of play around with them, play them different ways, play them with different intensities, even different finger velocity if you're using a keyboard, different levels of loudness. Sort of experiment with these intervals and figure how they make you feel. We all know that perhaps a major third is happy and a minor third is sad, but really dive into other intervals like tritone, minor seconds. Don't be afraid of dissonant intervals, even when talking in a melodic sense, which leads me to my fourth tip, and so fortunately final tip, and that is to not shy away from dissonant intervals in a melodic realm. I see a lot of people rely too much on thirds. I do see a lot of minor seconds being used in a melodic environment, but if you use intervals like the tritone in a melody, you can really create some very interesting sounds that you might have not thought of otherwise. And this is a tip for those composers. As I said earlier, I wanted to sort of target them a little bit. I apologize to everyone else, but in the topic of dissonant intervals, I suggest that you use tritones or perhaps chromatic medians that do not resolve into a diatonic pitch. Say for example you're in the key of C major and you land on a D. I really suggest maybe add a tritone up to an A flat. In that way, that's what I call opening a door, because you've been locked into this diatonic tonality where you're like limiting yourself to this very small collection of pitches, but suddenly you are playing a tritone that leads you to an A flat. You can harmonize it in a very interesting way. And I say it's opening a door because from there you can keep doing this, maybe in a sequence pattern or maybe in a more random one, and you can just quickly modulate between different keys, or perhaps you just completely abandon keys altogether and you're strictly using different types of pitch collections. So if you're a more advanced composer, I really suggest that you do not limit yourself to modulating through a very systematic way. We're not in the Baroque era anymore. You can really just be spontaneous about it. You can also be systematic about it in a more interesting way. But to really create that romantic John Williams sound that some of us are looking for, I really suggest playing around with chromatic intervals when talking about diatonic collections. Well, this brings me to the people who wrote the chords first. This is not a hard challenge to come by because most of the rules I spoke of before actually still apply. It's just a matter of coming up with a basic idea to create your sentence, and then from there on you have your form. And the way you create a basic idea, and perhaps if your repetition of the basic idea is actually a transposition because you cannot make it work otherwise, I recommend that you use a compositional technique known as guide tones. And what guide tones are is you're going to analyze your chord progression. You're going to find key pitches that perhaps sound interesting to you, and you're going to create a contour. And from that contour, you're going to using stitch tones, which are non-harmonic tones, which I will make a video of in the future. You can just sort of stitch together a melody. It does not have to be linear. Let me give you an example, because I know it's kind of hard to just understand from words. But say you have a C major chord going to an F major chord, and you're gonna decide your guide tones to be the roots of the chords, and you have your melody now consists of a C going to an F. Well, it has to be. You have to have an interesting way of going to that. You can definitely use the diatonic collection or the scale, just going up to that F, so like C, D, E, F. You, however, do not have to make it so. You can also just suddenly go from D to to G to A and then down to F, or you can just play around. But as long as you have your guide tones and you connect the first couple of guide tones with stitch tones, you now create a basic idea. You can now use that basic idea in a repetition of a slight variation, and then you can go from there. I am well aware that, well, I hope it didn't rush the video, but I'm very aware that this was quite a bit of information, especially for people who are just beginning. So please, if you have any questions, I will check constantly to make sure no one's left unanswered. Please leave them in the comments. I will try my best to get to you as soon as I can. If you would like me to make an entire video about something that perhaps needs a lot more time to develop, please let me know. I would love to do that. Specifically, more interesting types of horns. So perhaps other types of phrases or anything of that sort. It can be anything at all. It does not matter. Please let me know. I will definitely get to it at some point. And I hope you enjoyed, and if it was of any value to you, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed, liked, and shared the video on your social media. Keep writing. As long as you don't stop, you will continue to get better. Thanks for watching.